Due to recording issues, I'm recording a summary of Chapter 3 of the Philosophy of Misery. Likewise, I am going to make a habit of making short summaries for each chapter going forward, as well as going back to record summaries for the previous chapters and the preface. In Chapter 3, the big contradiction in the division of labor for Proudhon is positively the additions in wealth obtained and negatively the intellectual degeneracy, both a result of the division of labor. The positive result should be easily grasped. As different laborers engage in different tasks, they can be more productive and perform their tasks more efficiently. The negative result being that the constant division of tasks will result in monotony for the laborer, repetitive tasks, general drudgery, only requiring a limited scope of knowledge. Machinists are a group Proudhon cites as an example, where their industries now only require them to understand how to operate simple machines, whilst their wages were high at the time of writing. He notes that they would soon decline as per the simplicity and mundane essence of the occupation. Proudhon has yet to furnish us with a solution, as he states that we must consult humanity for our guide, which can only be done through the investigation of the other economic categories. This will principally come to play in the next chapter on machinery.
I agree.
I would agree with that. I found the first couple of chapters quite hard to follow, and particularly the introduction, as we've commented before, kind of
Hmm.
launching into this whole hypothesis of God thing. It's like,
Yeah.
where did that all come from?
I know. It really throws you for a loop. I think anybody who picks up the book is very difficult to make sense of it.
Hmm. I think here the structure becomes a lot clearer,
Right.
because he's just talking about various aspects of economics and the contradictions. It's been commented um, by many, including Marx, but also more sympathetic readers, that the structure is a little bit artificial in that he suggests that um, some phenomena emerge from earlier phenomena when really they're all kind of interlinked. It's not like you have the division of labor and then machinery and then um, you know
Right.
other ideas that kind of supersede them or try to nullify um, the negative consequences of them. It is a bit artificial, but I think he's just using it as a kind of uh, basis for discussion. Um,
Y-
you can't
Totally
take it
agree.
too literally in that sense.
Right. Yeah, because Marx does make that that statement, like, oh, he thinks it all unravels just like this. But I think Gurvich somewhere he points out that like some paragraph in this book somewhere that where Proudhon kind of states that he's really providing a model, of how the system works, and he's kind of going from simple to more complex. He's not necessarily saying it follows this exact sequence. And
Mm.
in Capital and Marx, he follows a very similar kind of reasoning, which is going from the very simple, from value, and it goes out. But yeah, like you said, there's probably a lot more things going on simultaneously than unraveling like this.
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
content, it's interesting how now the division of labor, it says first period. Economic, I guess, okay, it's the first economic evolution with value is the first spot. Yeah, it's great work. It's not that long either. Mm, Nothing stood out to me about that. But if I went through with that lens, I'd probably notice a lot. Yeah, the philosophy of progress is all about like movement. It's you can't stop movement, and this kind of speaks to that. His overall argument about the division of labor keep keeps spreading, basically.
I think the philosophy of progress is a great explanation of Proudhon's method that kind of permeates all of his works.
Yeah, it's really cool the multiple how these two worlds are both going on simultaneously. You get Proudhon in France, and then yeah, the Warren and Andrews crew over in the U.S. It is really remarkable that you have very similar doctrine almost becoming explicit with no connection between the two, or very little connection between the two.
I'd be very curious to hear about Proudhon's direct kind of successors in France, and whether his thought was really, I mean, other than the likes of Gurvitch and Onsar,
Yeah.
was there really a mutualist movement, or did it all kind of get subsumed into anarchism or socialism in general?
My understanding is that it was really taken off in the 60s, and in the early International, it had a very strong Proudhonism within it. And then,
Hmm.
but then the Paris Commune was the big, all the momentum stopped there. I mean, the mutualists had a big part in the Paris Commune, and then it was violently repressed afterwards, and it kind of just dampened the socialist movement there altogether for I think like 15 years. And then people start to get back into Proudhon around like 1890, and then the First World War kills that again.
From this first section on
Yeah,
division of labor.
yeah, I got one here. He says, if then I demonstrate that political economy is nothing but an organization of privilege and misery, I shall have proved thereby that it contains by implication the promise of an organization of labor and equality, since, as has been said, every systematic contradiction is the announcement of a composition. Further, I shall have fixed the basis of this composition. Then, indeed, to unfold the system of economical contradictions is to lay the foundations of universal association. To show how the products of collective labor come out of society is to explain how it will be possible to make them return to it. To exhibit the genesis of the problems of production and distribution is to prepare the way for their solution. He's just, he's just kind of reiterating what his overall goal is. So with the antagonism, like you said, he starts out with primitive communism. He says all men are equal in the state of primitive communism, equal in their nakedness and ignorance, equal in the indefinite power of their faculties. Um, he says your general progress must lead all men from original and negative equality to a positive equivalence of talents and acquirements. So he's saying in the beginning it's communistic and it's kind of like a negative. Like everybody's equal, but it's just because they don't have anything.
This reminds me a lot of the Bible.
Yeah.
Eating from the tree of knowledge, which was forbidden. Um, I mean, maybe that's kind of a parable for this kind of process that's being described, going from kind of ignorance and innocence and equality to, you know, uh, to knowledge and inequality. I don't know, it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And there's very Hegelian uh, themes running through it. Is Hegel is kind of starts that way, a very similar kind of. I think he starts with like a communistic stance, and then property is when the individual kind of like starts shaping something to their liking, and it has a very strong mental effect on a person owning something, owning property. And then Hegel's argument keeps going onto the state, and but yeah, I don't know. It has strong Hegelian vibes as well as biblical vibes.
I was going to say, who did Proudhon say his influences were? He said Adam Smith, the
Yeah,
Bible. Was there a
and
third? Was
then
it Hegel, in fact?
he says Hegel. Yeah, and a lot of people are like, take that back. It's not Hegel. You can't even read him at this time in French. Yeah, he. I think at this point in time, he's talking with all these Hegelians from Germany that have immigrated to France, and so he's really starting to seeping into his thought. But then, yeah, I think Marx in particular kind of makes him apprehensive about using a Hegelian outlook. Because, yeah, I mean, a good bit of that critique of Marx is just like, you try to use Hegel, you don't succeed, you suck at it. Yeah,
Yeah, he was accused of kind of butchering Hegel, but
right.
I mean, did he ever claim to be faithful to him, or was it just
No,
a kind of an
yeah,
inspiration?
yeah, I think in the book he's like barely mentioned Hegel in here, but there's a similar kind of themes running through it. But yeah, he never says I'm committed to Hegel's dialectic or I'm Hegelian. Like nothing like that appears. But Marx puts them together, and he's saying, yeah, Proudhon's trying to be just like Hegel, but he sucks at it basically.
Hmm.
Yeah, the intellectual movement proceeds parallelly parallel with the economic movement. They are the expression, the translation of each other. Psychology and social economy are in accord, or rather, they but unroll the same history, each from a different point of view. Yeah, this is very. I think we talked about this last time. Like Durkheim, to me, this is where Durkheim gets it from. Is maybe it's an Adam Smith thing. I haven't really read a lot of Adam Smith, but yeah, he's saying that the mind is develops at the same time that the division of labor develops. So there's like a social phenomenon going on that is also changing how the mind operates.
Yeah, does this tie into his kind of what he calls ideorealism? That kind of mind and matter proceed in tandem.
Yeah,
It's very much in
definitely.
that vein.
Yeah, seeing as I don't think he ever like uses that term a lot, but yeah, it's been picked up by a few sociologists that he does use an ideal realist approach, which is that
Mm.
there's something and the ideas and reality they kind of mirror each other, but they're different. And you have to kind of connect how the two intertwine. And yeah, so he's
Yes,
saying,
yet another dialectical opposition.
right. Yeah, see, that's a great point. That's what Gurvich says is that he just sees everything dialectically.
Yeah, he makes the point repeatedly that division of labor um, increases economic power, but for the individual workers, they just get into these hyper-specific fields um, that they end up performing monotonous tasks that are just soul-crushing and meaningless. It reminds me of a lot of. Have you read David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs?
I didn't
Actually,
read it, but yeah.
actually, another idea has occurred to me. I saw this video today on Facebook of a someone in a Chinese factory who was on a production line, and he was employed to just flick these nails into a box, and he was doing it really, really skillfully. But I thought, surely that could just be automated. But obviously, because he's paid so cheaply, he was just paid to do this really monotonous job that he was doing, as I said, very skillfully. And that to me highlights, the degeneration of the worker in this kind of system.
Yeah. So, yeah, so his point is like two things are occurring with the division of labor. You're getting this intelligence that's being realized, and people are also becoming there's more equality in comparison to the naked state of communism he's talking about. There's like it's the path towards equality. But at the same time, like you're saying, of course he approaches everything like this dialectically, as we're saying. He sees it as yeah, degrading the worker and turning them into like a just another commodity.
Hmm.
I like this quote a lot. First, he just talked about how great the division of labor is. And then now he says, but at this solemn hour of the division of labor, tempestuous winds begin to blow upon humanity. Progress does not improve the condition of all equally and uniformly, although in the end it must include and transfigure every intelligent and industrious being. It commences by taking possession of a small number of privileged persons, who thus compose the elite of nations, while the mass continues, or even buries itself deeper in barbarism. It is this exception of persons who, on the part of progress, which has perpetuated the belief in the natural and providential inequality of conditions, engendered caste, and given a hierarchical form to all societies. Um, it has not been understood that all inequality, never being more than a negation, carries in itself the proof of its own illegitimacy and the announcement of its downfall.
Um, Sorry for disappearing. I was going to say that some of this makes me think of is also what's the name? Rousseau's. Man is born equal, and everywhere he is in chickens and all that.
Yeah, and Sean mentioned earlier the big influences on Proudhon. A lot of people write that Rousseau is really I mean he's writing against Rousseau, but Rousseau is really always there in the background when Proudhon is writing. He's really responding to Rousseau, who had a big effect on the French Revolution.
But it's interesting. I sort of think of you know, I sort of think of Rousseau as being someone who I'm honestly not super fond of, but whatever Proudhon takes from Rousseau is definitely for the better. But also that I guess sometimes we I mean mutualists I don't think do this as much as NCOMs, but uh, people sort of sometimes have a tendency to like overlook or downplay the liberal influences on anarchism.
I've heard it be argued that anarchism is liberalism taken to its logical conclusion.
Right. I think that makes sense, but some people just like to pretend it's, uh, you know, I don't know. Some people just like to focus on the socialist side and not necessarily pay proper respect to the liberal side of it.
I mean, I
Mm.
almost think it's both. It's like it's taking liberalism to its end, but it's also taking communalism to its end. Like if you go to the end of where they both lead, in my view, it's towards this. You know, I mean, of course, that's how Proudhon would probably see it, since he sees everything as being connected, like in dialectical opposing ways. It reminds me, somewhere in this chapter, he talks about, I think it's at the very end, um, yeah, the grossest individualism. Let me see if I can get. Um, he's at the end of it. He starts talking about education and how if people aren't educated, then they it's like he says something about like if you take the masses who don't or who aren't educated about the world or are not interested about the world and you give them all this wealth, he said they're just going to become like he said that the Romans did this and they just kind of like everybody became like kind of barbaric almost. Everybody thinks that they know what they want, but it's really just some bullshit mindless stuff. To him that's the individualism that we're told that we're supposed to be. That's what you want, a bunch of superficial crap. I think Proudhon is saying that like with the liberalist tradition is like there's something deeper going on than just you know surface level pleasures. That makes sense.
That kind of reminds me of the difference in culture between old money and new money. Old money is really good at preserving their wealth. New money, like if you come from a poor family and you just earn a lot of money, they end up spending it on these really kind of ephemeral things. Um, and
Yeah.
it doesn't propagate itself in the same way that old money does. So yeah, I think without education, wealth in itself is not really of much use.
Yeah.
Again, is that not another kind of dialectical opposition? Your material conditions, your wealth, and your moral conditions, your education, they have to kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
One
It's
without
that
the
he's
other is.
always the material and the spiritual are always kind of he's trying to get them to balance with each other,
Hmm.
put them in accord.
Yeah, I spent a few months in France, and they're very keen on this method of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I mean, I'd never come across it before I went to France, but that is how they write essays. It's so embedded in the culture.
Wow.
That's Hegelian, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I've heard it's actually, I don't even know how you say his name, Fichte. I've heard it actually comes from him. But Marx, in his early years, said that was the Hegelian dialectic. Apparently, people say it's now is actually Fichte's, and Hegel's was apparently a little bit different.
Hegel called it abstract negative, I think, like the negation of the abstract, concrete. Those were his three stages. So you have an idea, and then it's negated by how it actually plays out in reality, and from that you get the concrete idea. That's my
Right.
understanding anyway. I've never
Hmm.
actually read any Hegel, but
Yeah, he's difficult. He's very complex. I haven't really read any either. Just read about Hegel.
I have to
I like.
admit that. Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, from my limited understanding of Hegel, that He's just one of those, kind of philosophers that are mostly only really understandable to people who spend tons of time reading philosophy. And
Right. Or
Yeah,
it's
I'm afraid
difficult.
I don't have the patience for really impenetrable language of that kind.
Yeah.
me neither, which is kind of why I like the analytical philosophers. It's like, there might still be a bit of specialized stuff as there is in any discipline, but it's sort of easier to plug in, so to speak. It's not, I don't know. I, I kind of, I just sort of feel like con, uh, a lot of continental philosophers, like, for example, I think about someone like some people like Deleuze and Guattari, and I'm sure they have some interesting things to say, but it also feels like a certain amount of their whole thing is like it sounds it sounds like mentally ill ramblings, and that's good. And I'm not saying that to be to be a sanist or anything. It's literally called like capitalism and schizophrenia, and it just sort of feels
Yeah.
like like when right wingers uh, say that the left wing fetishizes uh, mental illness. I think they might be kind of not wrong sometimes about that.
And then read the last sentence. I know. I'll just messing with you. I don't know how to read. I don't know what that says.
What's the phrase?
I don't even
You
know how
go.
to say it.
I've just plugged it into Google Translate and it says, "You go far and always adore your footsteps." Hmm.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find an alternative for that.
Where would Proudhon be without his Latin epigraph?
Yeah, he does use it a lot.
I
Actually,
guess
the
that's
only
part of
reference
why it
to
gets
this.
called bourgeois.
Yeah, I guess he's peasant. Peasant background.
He seems
I
to
was
have
like,
invented this phrase. I
oh
can't see any
really?
other references to it. Well, Latin was the language of learned people of the time, kind of almost like the English of back then, or at least
Yeah.
uh, coming out of medieval times, of the
Just
Renaissance.
it's just it's just really funny to me when Marxists call Proudhon bourgeois, but then have no problem with all of Engels's factory money.
I know. Ingalls is like bourgeois. I mean, like hardcore. Nobody seems to really doesn't seem to bother them. I guess they say he since when I reread the Communist Manifesto, I read it recently. Yeah, Marx's position is that like there's going to be a clean split between capital and labor, and you got and representative of that is the bourgeois on the capital side, and you got the proletariat on the labor side. And the peasants and the petite bourgeois, they don't fit in because they use both of those. So they're this kind of like back, and they're going to be absorbed by the proletariat in the future anyway. So it's like they're kind of just like these, they want to save parts of the market and they want to use capital against labor. And for Marx, that's like an absurdity. It's like no, that's why, and to my view, he lumps the peasants with the petite bourgeois, is because to them they both mix capital and labor, which is unacceptable in the way he views how things are unfolding. I I believe he started talking around about that around like 48. I haven't read the second volume of this. I'm not really sure. I believe he starts talking about credit and stuff like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, credit is one of the chapters for sure. In fact, we have a translation of most of the first couple of parts of that. I don't know whether he actually talks about mutual banking as such. The phrase mutual credit also doesn't appear.
Yeah.
If memory serves, is it the solution to the social problem when he
I think that's
lays
really what
out?
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like 48, like 2 years after this.
Looks like Clarence Swartz did chapter 10. Sean Wilbur did some for the McKay anthology. It says here chapter 14 by Ian McKay. I don't know whether that actually is McKay or whether he was just the editor. But anyway. So we've got most of credit, we've got property, and the summary and conclusion in volume 2.
So what's the book generally about?
He's laying out he's trying to make a science out of political economy, is to my understanding, and he's trying to show why it's all how it all operates and why it leads to misery, but at the same time it leads to progress in some sense. He's trying to make sense of what's happening. To me, it's like the original Capital. It's like Capital is different, but it's Proudhon's Capital, if that makes sense. He's
Right.
actually
Yeah,
trying to
he's
do
trying
it.
to establish. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think where you're headed is a scientific socialism. Like he's actually trying to,
That
yeah,
was exactly what I was going to say.
yeah, read your mind. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Marx and Engels, they get all the credit for for distancing themselves from utopian socialism. But it's like Proudhon really did that first. I mean, whether or not that's a good thing is a different story. But he's really trying to make it make a science out of socialism. People haven't recognized that. I feel like out of Proudhon's work,
Yeah, he
particularly
still
his
gets called a
earlier work.
utopian, which I think is just ironic, as I've said before. If there's anything he's not, if there's anything he seems to rail against, it's kind of idle, abstract utopias.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if Marx rails on him there about it, but yeah, Marx kind of makes it seem like Proudhon is 100% against strikes. But to my understanding of Proudhon's position is that he doesn't really think strikes work that well. He's not against them in principle. He's just against them working out. So it's like if everybody demands to double the wage, they double the wage. I think he tries to show that your problem actually doesn't go away. It's like it just leads to a different contradiction.
Yeah, the irony is he comes across as very pragmatic. His
Yeah.
opposition to strikes is motivated by practical concerns. But I mean, this is the guy who wrote, Political Capacity of the Working Classes. So, he isn't just some sort of bourgeois idealist. And I was going to say before, him getting labelled as bourgeois is ironic considering he was so poor that he couldn't even afford to buy proper shoes for school.
Wooden clogs.
Yeah.
He would take off at the door.
Well, it's funny you should mention wooden clogs when we're talking about strikes. You might already know this, so forgive me if I'm
I know
telling
what
you
you're going to
all.
say about
Okay,
sabotage.
that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the origin of the word sabotage is the French wooden clog, which is sabot, sabot, and sabotage originally comes from people clogging, if you want to use an English word, although that doesn't have a
I like
connotation
that
with
plugging.
industrial strength. But they putting their wooden shoes in the machines.
That's right. Yeah. I love that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Marx's
Well,
theory of exploitation centers around markets per se, doesn't it? Yeah, monopolies essentially.
of course, then later Marxists are known for their problems with monopoly capital. Not that they favor dispersing the capital, but
Yeah. I like when he rails against universal instruction. Like he's railing against modern education, and to me, it still like really holds true. I'm going to read a passage. It says, "Into what terrible struggles of pride and misery does this mania for universal instruction plunge us? Of what use is professional education? Of what good are agricultural and commercial schools if your students have neither employment nor capital?" And down a little bit further, he says, "Cling rather to your system of exclusion and privilege, a system as old as the world, the support of dynasties and patriciates, a veritable machine for gelding men in order to secure the pleasures of a caste of sultans. Set a high price upon your teaching, multiply obstacles, drive away by lengthy tests the son of the proletaire, whom hunger does not permit to wait, and protect with all your power the ecclesiastical schools, where the students are taught to labor for the other life, to cultivate resignation, to fast, to respect those in high places, to love the king, and to pray to God. For every useless study sooner or later becomes an abandoned study. Knowledge is poison to slaves." I like that. That's that reading. Yeah. Yeah, my understanding, because what's his name? Who's the guy in France who writes about Proudhon a lot? The American. Uh,
Castleton, Edward Castleton.
Castleton. Yeah, he wrote an article on this comparing the approaches on education between Proudhon and Marx, which is kind of interesting niche topic. But Proudhon comes down as being kind of like an advocate of applied education, like you're going into a workshop, and at the workshop there's like a education for how to do the job. It's much more hands-on approach. Whereas the other approach, I'm not sure if Marx is there, but yeah, the standard way is like a universal instruction where you just go to school and you sit there and like you're basically kind of like most of the time it's like a passive view of the student. Like you sit there and you're filled with knowledge by the teacher. The
Exactly.
student doesn't really need to do anything. You just have to listen.
They're
That's
just an empty vessel to pour knowledge into. Yeah.
pour the knowledge into. Yeah, here's the truth. But yeah, I think Proudhon was honest, and I think that's how things are moving these days. They're much more like towards applied things. But people want to see like one, I can get a job with this, and two, like why am I learning this? Like what, if you don't see the value in what you're learning, you're not really gonna try to learn what you're not really gonna grapple with it. As someone who teaches in higher ed, it is really sad how people approach education and how minimal people do to try to get by. I don't know. The system is just our education system is not working.
This paragraph that you've highlighted, it reminds me of all the people who went to university and then ended up doing something completely different, and or all of the people that chase PhDs without any actual jobs at the end of it. Now, I'm not saying that there's not obviously value in education for education's sake, but in some respects there is too much prestige put on the titles associated with it.
Oh my god! Yeah,
even though it's not actually going to lead to improving your life in any way.
Weber does a really
Give it
Max
shallow.
Weber. How he brings in credentialing into how the economy works. In America, it's just credentialing gone wild. I mean, everybody's obsessed with credentials, and it's like at the end of the day, the credentials don't really prove that much. I mean, people are just preparing for the test, and as soon as the test is done, they forget everything half the time. I mean, I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah, they're just jumping through hoops and ticking boxes.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean they're any good at that subject or that they can apply it practically.
Yeah, what you're saying about like people with PhDs who study very niche things. Academia, I swear to God, as someone who's been there for a while, there's two types of people. There are the people who go to school, they take a break from education, they go out, they have a job, do something, and then they go back and they finish their higher ed. Then there are the people that just go straight from K through 12 into undergrad, into master's program, into a PhD, and then into some high prestige professor position. Those people are like out of touch with reality in my experience. So They view themselves as so much smarter than everybody else and have this like pretentious attitude about the world. I don't know. I notice a gigantic difference between the two categories of people.
Yeah, they're kind of chasing intellectual capital, aren't they?
Yeah, there you go. Oh, this is just a bunch of rambling anyway.
Hey, rambling is important.
Can be. Here's a science quote. If you want me to
Yeah, go
do
for
another
it.
reading. All right, he says, "It is surely a sad symptom for a science when, in developing itself according to its principles, it reaches its object just in time to be contradicted by another. For example, when the postulates of political economy are found to be opposed to those of morality. For I suppose that morality is a science, as well as political economy. What then is human knowledge, if all its affirmations destroy each other? And on what shall we rely? Divided labor is a slave's occupation, but it alone is really productive. Undivided labor belongs to the free man, but it does not pay its expenses. On the other hand, political economy tells us to be rich. On the other, morality tells us to be free."
Yeah, that was an interesting quote. I didn't know quite what to make of it though. Uh,
He's always trying to put the two in accord. That's what he says in his 1839 celebration of Sunday. Is he's focused on these two realms of reasoning, like, you know, rational thought, I guess, and then the other one is conscience, like the emotional world.
mhm.
He's saying right now they're all out of line with each other. Someone who's like focused on the rational world typically will be very out of touch with their emotional world. He's saying I'm going to try to put the two into alignment with each other, and he's saying he can make a like a science almost in between them to figure out like where do morals come from and then how does it relate to political economy. He's very dialectical.
Yeah,
Very anti-absolutist.
Right.
huh. I I think this is a good. I think that was a good note to end on if we want to, but I'm not opposed to continuing.
I was gonna say that I really like the thing he says about not people not all following one given direction. Um,
Not all following one direction.
wasn't there like some part of it that someone read where it's like, shall we all follow one directive given by?
Oh, I think that
Oh
was
no,
part of the education.
right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, but
Yeah, I think.
um,
Were you gonna say something?
no, because
Or I may be wrong because I think I need to review the second part a little more thoroughly to get like his critiques, especially because I don't know these people that he's talking
Yeah.
about. But I think
The chapter does have a lot of that, talking about Blanky and other people from his
Blanky.
time.
I think he was talking about if we just put more people into education, that's not gonna improve conditions because there's like only a limited number of spots where those positions can fulfill, essentially.
Right.
Like,
Supply and demand, right?
yeah,
Exactly. And there's a that's what Randall Collins talks about. And God, the themes in the two writers remind me a lot of each other. He's a modern day sociologist. He talks about how there's just credential inflation. So it's like every like 30 years or so, it's like a little bit higher, a little bit higher. So it used to just be a high school degree to get like a decent job. Now it's then it was a bachelor's degree. Now it's probably about like a master's degree to expect to get a decent job. And they actually said that a PhD, you actually do worse than if you just have a master's in terms of financial outcome. But yeah, it's just but yeah, that's what the system tells everybody to do. Go to school, get a degree. That'll fix your
the
problem.
system, man.
Yeah, and it's just
Yeah, man.
it's not working because at the end of the day, the issue is the supply and demand of the actual jobs.
well, I always like to say from each according to their supply, to each according to their demand. But
Yeah.
I love to say that just to ruffle some feathers. But I do also
Whoa.
think there's something to it to some degree.
I think Sean Wilbur came up with kind of a formulation along with those lines as well, but I don't remember how it went exactly. I think it was necessarily not very pithy. You go ahead and chat about that, and I'll have a quick search.
I don't know what to chat about.
Whatever you like.
Well, something for me is like, the meaning of division of labor, because, sometimes that term is used to argue against specialization, and sometimes it's used to talk about uh, labor not making its full value of its product. Right? Or am I just off base on that?
I think you're, I think you're fine.
But it's just it's kind of confusing how it can mean either thing, because those are two pretty different things.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Gary, did you see the quote I pulled from Xavier Renegade Angel?
When?
Yesterday at 7:20.
On Twitter?
No,
Or
on
on.
Discord.
Oh, I didn't notice
I'm
it. Which
surprised
quote?
you haven't won. You are one. You have all shown nobility in your selfless surrender to the greater good. There can be no glorious collective without the individual. Therefore, each one of you is better than any other one of you, or the group. Don't let anybody put your parts in your hole and squeeze out communism. You should each reward yourselves decadently for your lack of greed and selflessness.
This, but unironically,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what I
that must
say
be
to
from the
that.
second season. What? That's a pretty
That
good
is
one.
surprisingly insightful for that show. Oh my god!
Yeah.
There's some insights to be had.
I know, but
Yeah.
it's just that show is just, I don't know. Like, sometimes I like it, but it's also just
It's a little too much. Yeah, it can be too much. I agree. It's a little too absurd.
It's everything and nothing all at once.
There you go. The
yeah. And
dialectical.
I also just feel like a lot of, I mean, I hate to be such a gatekeeper, but I feel like a lot of the people who watch that show, like, don't realize that it's more so, at least for me, when I watch it and like it, it's because to me it feels like a good parody of the people who are, making fun of quote unquote wokeism and stuff. And so on that angle, it's become even more relevant since it came out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Whereas I think for some people who watch it, they watch it because they think it is a good parody of the attitudes that they themselves mock.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know anybody that watches that show. Hades is the first person I really encountered out in the wild that actually watches it.
Yeah,
Well, I watched it only because
yeah.
you brought it up.
The two of you are the main people I can think of who watch
Tim
also.
and Eric's bedtime stories it reminds me of similar humor. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
What doth life?
What
What
doth
doth
life?
life?